Welcome to the second video in Quadcopter Build Series 6. Now in the first video we put all of this frame together, we added the motors, the ESCs, went through some of the basics, and in this video we're going to continue and complete the build, do the quick Betaflight setup and go out and have a test fly. Now again, if you are new to building quadcopters, this isn't probably the best series to start with. We have other series on the channel, Quadcopter Building for Beginners series, that goes through each of the steps in an awful lot more detail, because I am going through this at quite a pace because it's just my first build of this particular setup. Now again, all the pieces that are in this quadcopter are earlier on in this series where you can go and have a look, because I'm building the Flynoceros ether frame. I'm using the Holobro all-in-one Kakute flight controller version 2, and we're going to put the Atlatl on the top as well. Now if we look at how we left the frame last time, it looks like I've done an awful lot, but I really haven't. All I've done is I've just installed the camera into the cage. I've connected the cage just by loosely connecting the front two screws, and this is one of the nice things about the frame. The whole thing is going to hinge open, and I've just screwed in the connector at the back of the video transmitter just to get an idea of how it's all got to go together. Now at the moment I haven't done any more wiring, I haven't connected anything else in here. At the end of the last video I talked about putting on the connection for the receiver. I haven't done that yet because I thought it'd be interesting to show it in here, because as I was starting to play with this, if I just kind of close this up, give you a rough idea of how it's all going together. The Atlatl seems to want to go in that position there. Hopefully you can see that on the camera okay. So that kind of works really well. The antenna, the way it's routed around the bottom, works great. And then the next thing to do is to install the receiver. This is an XSR. I'm going to use this because I fancy turning the telemetry stuff on. Now as you can see here, we have quite a bit of room above the stack, and this is one of my 3D printed carriages. I might actually show how I designed that. A lot of people have been asking me to show some more of the design stuff. That should fit at the top with the spacers, and then that allows me to have the antennas routed along here and out the back on a couple of heat shrunk cable ties, and everything should just about fit. So a 3-stack setup inside this frame will work if you're careful about your clearances. So let's have a look at how we're going to wire all of these bits together, because there's a little wiring loom that fits onto the side of the Atlatl, the video transmitter. That has 4 cables on it, so they need to be plugged into somewhere on the flight controller. I like the way that it's all separate, because it does mean that I can kind of solder this where I need to on the flight controller and then kind of put the thing on the top. Of course I need to be careful to make sure no cables are touching the vibration isolated IMU, which is one of the reasons why I can hard mount this flight controller without any rubber grommets or any of that shenanigans. And we also have the clip for the receiver as well. So it's probably worthwhile me just pausing for a second and talking about the connections. Now all of the stuff is kind of in the manual already, so it isn't particularly tricky, but let me summarize it in a nice easy to follow color diagram. So we need to connect the receiver to the flight controller, the camera and the Atlatl HV pieces too. The first one is the receiver. Now I'm probably going to do one extra connection, which is going to allow me to send the telemetry information back to the Taranis radio, but the basic 3 connections are there on the bottom left hand side of the board. Next connection we need to think about then is to the camera, and that is going to need a 5-volt and ground power supply, which is up at the top here on the left hand side, and we're also going to connect the video signal from the camera into the video in or VI pin on the flight controller. All pretty standard stuff so far. The last bit that's a bit more complicated is the Atlatl HV. Now the Atlatl can be powered from the main battery voltage, and I'd recommend doing that. The voltage regulator on the flight controller I think will do 1.5 amps at 5 volts. I may put LEDs on later. I'd like to use that 5 volts just for the camera. So let's power it from the battery pin and the ground pin on the flight controller. And the last 2 cables, the video cable for it goes into the video out pin, pretty standard stuff, and the telemetry pin connects to the T6 pin on the flight controller, because that's the one that's going to be used by the Betaflight OSD to set things like frequency bands and stuff. If I can make it fit, I'd like to have the Atlatl at the top. That way I could fit the heat sink, which is only really used when using the higher powers. I'm only going to be using this on 25 milliwatts anyway, so it should be cooled fine in the middle of the stack. But if I can get it so it fit at the top, that'd be really good. But it really depends on how all the cable routing works and how it actually goes together. So join me in a second and we'll have a look at how it all finished up. Now the way I've decided to put this together is to put the Atlatl video transmitter above the flight controller, and the reason for that is because I'm trying to put it any higher up doesn't allow for the cable to be routed into the mount at the back of the frame. So I'm using the 3D printed mount for the XSR with a couple of custom 3D printed spacers to hold those top two pieces in place, and it just fits inside the frame beautifully. So then it's a case of plugging in the cables that we have just soldered onto the flight controller for the XSR and also the Atlatl as well. Once those are in place, then it's just a case of plugging in the camera too and starting to attach the cage. 4 screws, 2 at the front. I would recommend putting those in first and then folding everything down over the back of the frame, and then the other 2 screws in the back secure everything. Last job then before we plug it into Betaflight is to install the antenna. You'll notice I've also used the good old cable tie method on the arms to also keep the antennas out of the way of anything nasty. Okay, now we've done that, let's plug it into Betaflight and do the configuration. Not going to spend a ton of time here in Betaflight because I have a complete other video that shows how to do all that, but in this video let me just show you the special stuff about this particular flight controller. First thing you notice when you go into the ports tab is there is a lot of them. So UART1 is being used for smart port, UART3 is being used for S-Bus, UART4 by default is set to run a RunCam, UART5 is set for my ESC telemetry, those wires that we wired up, and UART6 is set for IRC tramp, so we can control the Atlatl through the on-screen display. Going into the main settings, everything here looks pretty standard stuff. It's D-Shot. If we go down to the bottom, and let me just put craft name in. I like that on the screen so people, if they're watching my feed, know who they are. We're going to have telemetry turned on, LED strips turned on. I haven't got LEDs on this. I might add them later. Don't like air mode turned on all the time, but we will have OSD and ESC sensors turned on. I might turn on anti-gravity later because this is kind of a freestyle quad. I'll need to play around with it and tune it all in. Last thing to do, apart from obviously set up the receiver and the on-screen display to the way you like it, is also set up the modes. By default there's just Horizon mode set, so I've just gone through and configured it to be the way that I like it. Also quickly ran the motors up just to make sure they were okay. 2 of them were the wrong way around, which is usually the way when you have 4 identical arms. 2 of them are going to be in the wrong rotation. That was motors 4 on 1 on mine. Connected to it via BL Heli and just reversed those 2 ESCs. And then it was a case of just putting on the props properly, and then we're ready to go out and test hover in the back garden, see if it's all going to work. So this is a particularly cold morning this morning, but it's going to be fine just for the quick little hover around. I'm also interested to see where the hover point's going to be. The weight of this model with a battery is about 512 grams, and it is not bad at all. That's pretty stable. It's hovering at about minus 41% on the throttle on the Taranis, so what's that, 29% throttle, something like that. So there's lots and lots and lots and lots of power in this, so I'm going to have an awful lot of fun playing with this, tuning it and goofing around. I'm probably going to put a little bit of a throttle curve on the radio because it is hovering, or it feels like it's hovering at a very, very low stick position because of those beefy motors that we've got on this guy. So a couple of final shots to show you how it looked when I'd finished putting this thing together. This has been a really fun build. I get a big kick out of building these things and getting them to fly. That little rush of exhilaration and excitement the first time it takes into the air is just like it was when I made my first quadcopter about 5 years ago. So over the next couple of weeks I'll be taking this out and putting it through its paces. It's going to need a little bit of tuning. The way it landed there was bouncing around, tells me that there needs to be a bit of work done. But if there's anything exciting to report from all that flying and testing, I'll make one last video with a frame just to show you what I found out. So thank you for sticking with it for the last couple of videos. Hopefully that's been interesting and fun for you to watch. I'll put links in the description for the pieces that I've used, but hopefully you'll agree this is a very pretty quadcopter, and if you take your time you can get a really neat build. If you found that video useful or like the content, then please hit the like and subscribe button down below. If you want to go the extra step, you can become a Patreon of the Painless 360 channel and help provide support for what I do here. All the videos created here are put into playlists, so if you're interested in a particular topic, have a look at the playlist, and they all are organised in there to make them easier to use. If you're not sure if there's a video for your particular problem or topic you want to know more about, then add Painless 360 to the Google search term that you're interested in, and that should find the video, article or content about the particular thing that you're interested in having a look at.